I know it's been over a month since you've said anything, but hopefully my presence here can make some kind of difference, I just... What? Yeah?
Son.
Oh my god, what is it? What is it?
Come closer.
Yeah?
Closer, come closer.
Yeah.
Get a little bit closer. Oh.
It's pretty close, but...
Tell Daily Solutions that I love them.
Okay. I will.
All right, hey everybody, welcome.
I am Graham.
And I am Ashkahn. And this is the Daily Solutions podcast. Every day we take a question from the people who have submitted,
and usually Graham reads it.
We answer it. If this is like the first episode you happen to be listening to.
It's not. No one asked, "What do you do for a podcast?" That's not our episode. We're answering that one
because we do it every day.
It's part of the Daily Solutions podcast. All right, so today's question is, considering the wide demographic in floaters, does it matter where in my city I'm located? The existing center in town is in the center of the hippest areas.
Whoa.
The hippest areas.
Yeah, they're just like...
So I was just talking to Derek, and he said that we should make fun of the people who submit questions less. I realized that it's true. I'm very tempted after I read a question to start picking it apart. And all
what kind of idiots send this thing?
But we love you people who send in questions.
Yeah, we love the questions. We just like grammar and...
I think you were going to say Graham. No, so keep sending in questions. I will definitely
this is good. This
make
is a good
fun
question.
of them.
This
is a wonderful question.
Yeah,
that's why we did it. The
bad
questions you don't even hear. Man, there's some of the shit that people send in there. All right, so demographics, doesn't matter where in the city they're located. Existing centers in the center of the hippest areas.
Okay, so a location question. So basically,
very adequate categorization there, Ashkahn.
Float tank centers are interesting because you're not a business that relies on foot traffic really as much as a lot of other like storefronts do.
Even though it's cool,
if you were a restaurant or like a clothing store, those are the type of places that I think have a lot, they just depend a lot on being in an area where people will walk by and be like, oh, we should go into this restaurant, or look at this clothes in this window. So even we're in a pretty foot trafficky, hip kind of storefront area ourselves. And still, despite that, the number of people who are just wandering off the street and trying to book appointments is not that many. I mean, it's nice because people walk by and they get brochures and you can sit in our lobby and you can listen to people walk by, and 1 out of 10 people the float on derails their conversation and they start talking about floating because they walk by our place.
I still hear it down the street too. If I'm at just the sandwich shop, 1 block down, the amount of people wandering by who are still talking about floating after walking by the shop is really cool.
So it's almost like a point of advertising or something like that. That you're almost like a billboard for yourself on a storefront, and that it doesn't exactly lead to people literally wandering in and spending money with you right away, like it would for, I think, a restaurant or a clothing store, or I don't know, an antique shop, or those other kind of just walk by.
I mean, restaurants are kind of
places.
interesting too. I mean, for a busy restaurant that actually books out, it's very similar to us. A restaurant is kind of a destination location.
Yeah, it can
There's a maximum number of people who can go into it.
There's a mix of it. I think the thing with restaurants is people always are eating around other activities. So if you're going to do something, you're we should grab dinner nearby.
Not an hour and a half float.
Yeah, exactly, right? Floating more is the destination. You'd go to float and you'd grab dinner nearby the float, because the float is the activity that you're going to do. So, all this is to say that we have the benefit as being a float center of being a little bit more off the beaten path, or not having to worry quite as much about being on that really storefront, foot trafficky sort of area.
Yeah, I would almost say there's 2 really big benefits that come from being in central, hip areas. Maybe 3, maybe 4.
Location.
I was going to put a 4th location in there and just call it good, No, so one of them is just what you said. Your shop is a billboard. You're getting a monthly billboard might be a couple $1,000s per month. If you're paying $1,000 extra in rent to be where you are, then you're getting a cheap billboard. If you're paying $3,000 extra in rent and billboards are $2,000, maybe you go with more out of the way location and literally get a billboard. So that causes conversation, right? So there's that aspect. Like it is just when there's more foot traffic going by you, it looks good, like to the outside world, and conversations get started. And the looking good, I guess, was the second one I wanted to mention, which is, if you're in like the basement of some building on the outskirts of town, people realize you're in the basement of some building on the outskirts of town. And if you're in a hip district, people realize that too. And there is something just that reflects on your brand about being in a cool area and being in a public place and just occupying that space that people associate with coolness. Yeah,
people, say that all the time about where our shop is. They're like, oh, this is like totally fits into this street. Yeah. Like it kind of complements the neighborhood that it's in.
And so the third one is just population density that I was going to toss out there.
Before that, one more thing on the second one is that I feel like there's a lessening impact on the idea of like building credibility for your float center by being in a like legit retail street. Like when we opened, there were so few float centers around.
Most of them are in people's apartments or on the outskirts of town in some basement.
And so like there was just something about us being on like and having an actual storefront on a like real busy retail street that immediately kind of gave the business credibility. Like when you're like, oh, our business is like on this street, people are like, oh, that sounds like a real business. And that was really useful for us, I think, in the day. And I think it still can be useful. Floating is still a weird thing. But over time, as people learn about it more and there are more float centers, that's going to become less of a benefit. But that is definitely still part of it, right? Like we're still offering a kind of weird, relatively unknown, semi-strange service. And there you just get some inherent credibility by being a business on a known business street.
Yeah. And then again, that's not a small one in my mind. That is a nice advantage of that. And so population density, like I was going to say, is kind of the third main benefit that I see, which is, in all of our analysis of different float centers, marketing and consulting and stuff that we do, it really does seem that one of the biggest things that can contribute to you filling up your tanks more than half capacity or something is just being in an area that has a lot of people, right? Not even like a huge city, just a relatively dense center or a place where a lot of people are living around, So if you are in the center of these kind of hip areas inside a city, it probably means there's a lot of people that live around there in condos and different high-rises or at least a good amount of apartments and things like that, as opposed to obviously the more rural you get or into suburbia, just the more things are standalone, single houses, the less population density, which obviously just means less people who can come into float who live within a couple miles of your center. And that's a really big one.
Yeah, it seems like the distance from someone's house to a float center is one of the almost like biggest contributing factors to what float center they float at.
Yeah. And if you do an analysis of our customers and just look at the different zip codes going around, the amount that they're just centered right around the shop, it just is a degrading by radius of how many people come in to float. So
it makes sense, right? Like you're trying to relax. You don't want to like have to drive all the way across town, or like the idea of floating and then being able to be home in like a short drive and like keep chilling out is an appealing one. And like it can be kind of a deterrent to have to drive a great distance. We hear that all the time for people who open float centers. Mm-hmm. One of the most common stories I hear is someone like got really into floating with the closest float center was like 50 miles away from them, and it was so annoying that it inspired them to open a float center in their own town. So it's clearly a factor.
And I have two downsides as well. Do you have any more like big upsides to being in a hip area besides those ones?
You get to meet hip people. That's It is cool. Like, being in a cool neighborhood is like the other businesses around you and stuff like that are often like doing cool things, and you get to form cool business partnerships and things like that. We've had some fun with just like literally having businesses down the street from us or cool restaurants close by to us that kind of it all like feeds into itself a little bit.
Yeah, that is actually very true. Cool kind of alliances you get to make when everyone else around you is also cool.
Uh-huh.
Yeah. Upsides?
You get to work in a cool area?
Okay. So the downsides that I have are, one, rent. It's more expensive.
Sure.
It just costs more to be in those up-and-coming areas, or especially ones that are already established. You're going to be paying a good amount more in rent to move into what's currently the hip area.
It'll make you question how much space you want much more.
Yeah.
And it'll probably make you compromise on space, and you'll probably have to constantly be dealing with not having enough space.
and then you'll a little bit hate your decision. And so that's a big one,
Yeah,
though.
for sure.
Cost is a huge one. And then noise, I
Yeah.
was going to say, is the other really big one for soundproofing. And it just means if you move into the center of an area that's bustling and noisy and crowded, you will have to invest more money into your soundproofing.
Yeah, I mean, there's just more people. There's bigger and more cars. There's public transportation. There
That's
might be
a
like
huge
rail
one, yeah.
lines or subways. There's often multi-story buildings that you're going to have to like, either be in the first or second floor of. And
A lot
deal
more
with that.
construction, too. Like when
more
there's more buildings
construction.
around, there's more big buildings being constructed and buildings being torn down. And that can contribute to a lot of noise when you're in these kind of, again, especially up and coming hip areas where if they're up and coming, it means there's a lot of old buildings that
Yeah.
are going to be demolished and new noisy construction going up.
Which is it just means like think about that in terms of your construction costs. Like you're most likely going to have to invest more money in soundproofing if you're in the middle of a hustle bustle area.
So no, I mean, you can definitely succeed away from the center of a cool area. I mean, especially if you're not in a hip area, but it's still relatively populated. That might be something that I look for. Going for, if you are moving into a hip area as well or considering spaces there, looking for something just a little off the beaten path, or maybe a little towards the edge of it where there's
Yeah.
likely to not be as much public transit, not quite as much fear of construction. And
Yeah, it's like off the main strip by like a block or something is a place I see float centers.
Yep, and then you lose that billboard side of it
Right.
for advertising and people walking by. So all of it's kind of a trade-off. This is to say.
Yeah, it's kind of the nice thing about a float center is like you could succeed in either of these settings. Like if you would be telling me you were trying to open a boutique clothing store like way off the beaten path with no businesses around you, I'd be like, that's probably a bad idea. Like you shouldn't do that. But like most of your customers are finding you online or hearing about you from a friend and calling. You know what I mean? Like,
And even if they do find out about you through walking into your store, they often just pick up a brochure and leave.
Yeah.
And then go online and read
Yeah.
more. But they're not like walking in and immediately floating.
I know. Like I want to say like my gut feeling is that like 90% of our customers walk into our store for the first time when they're there for their appointment.
Oh,
Probably more than that.
over
like,
that. And again, of the people who like that's not their first time in our store and they wandered in before, they're like almost 0% are wandering in and then floating right then.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. That's very rare. So it really there's benefits to both sides, and the nice thing is like you could make either one work. I guess parking is another benefit of being away from the strip. It's when you're doing something as long as floating, it's very nice to have like parking spots available, and it's way easier like outside of a crazy part of town.
And then on the flip side, public transit is usually easier to get to those places.
That's
So
true.
if you're more isolated, then it might just be harder for a certain set of clients who don't have cars to make it out to you.
Yeah, I guess it depends on your city and how big public transportation is and all that. But you should know that.
But and the question really was like, can I succeed outside of a hip area? And the answer is totally yes. Like,
Yeah.
hopefully we just weighed some
And I guess-
pros and cons, huh? Some cons for you.
Got it. I guess the other thing to consider
fun
in all
today,
this
yeah.
is where the other float centers are in town. Like it's not something I think you should ignore. Like there's often a benefit to trying to like balance out the city in terms of where you're opening a float center. So like that I would say is probably a big variable. If you look at like the city you're trying to open in and you see where the existing float centers are, like try to find an area that seems like it's far away or it's not serviced well by those other people. Like I'd say that's probably going to do better than like moving in 2 blocks away in that hip area down the street from where there's already a float center.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, again, like you're usually the biggest competitor you have, I usually say, is lack of awareness. But when you're moving into a district that a float center is already kind of centered at and you're moving into the epicenter of that, it means they've already probably built awareness around that 2-mile radius or so pretty well. So just in your own interest of kind of having isolated customers who all of a sudden, if you move in really close to someone, you might have competition. It's people might be deciding whether or not to go to their float center or your float center. And
Yeah.
if you're even 3 miles away, all of a sudden it's like, well, people who are on the closer side of that 3 miles have a big incentive to go to you instead of them. So yeah, there's this nice just balancing act and lack of what's the word? I was going to say competition again, but I was looking for a better word. I'll just say it again. Lack of competition that comes with spreading yourselves out a little bit. Woo! So I got a big mug of coffee today instead of a small mug. So good episode. Good episode.
Yeah. So, in conclusion, like if you don't go to the hip neighborhood, you're not a hip person and you should feel bad.
Doesn't sound like anything we said
what?
before. So probably the worst conclusion that
I wasn't really
I've ever heard in my
listening
life.
before. All right. All right, if you guys have other questions you want to ask us, you can go to floatanksolutions.com/podcast.
And we will absolutely not make fun of them.
Definitely not. Thank you for sending
Thank you,
them in.
everyone. Thank you today for sending in the question,
seriously,
too.
good. It's very nice.
Bye, everyone.
Right.